Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 36 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Christina Hagen, coming to you live from Cape Town. And now we're on to the main event. Tegan Carpenter-Kling joined BirdLife South Africa in 2020, fresh from doing her PhD, which focused on tracking various seabird species on Marion Island. So this stood her in very good stead for all the fieldwork and data analysis she had had to do as the Coastal Seabird Project Manager. Her main research focuses on identifying important at-sea habitats for our threatened coastal seabirds by tracking their movements in the water using miniature biologgers. And she'll tell us about this work now and how it's being used to conserve these species. So Tegan, please switch on your video and you can start sharing.
First slide is there.
Yes, it's there. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Christina. And good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to join you on Conservation Conversations this evening to tell you a little bit more about how we are keeping track of our seabirds and how this research contributes towards birds conservation, most importantly. Let's see. There we go. So first, I'd like to say that this is not a sole effort of BirdLife South Africa, but rather it is a joint collaboration between many organizations that work together towards this research and towards translating this research into conservation of the birds. So let's go into the background of the environment of these seabirds, which is very important. So the Benguela upwelling region runs along the coast of Namibia, South Africa, and Angola, and it's extraordinarily productive ecosystem that supports several specialized endemic animals. Within the food web of the Benguela ecosystem, the intermediate trophic level is dominated by just a few species of pelagic fish, namely sardine and anchovy. And these fish play an unproportionately important role in this ecosystem. And fluctuations in their numbers can have knock-on effects throughout the food web. And these knock-on effects are often most conspicuous to us humans in the higher trophic levels, such as the penguins, the large fish such as tuna, and the seals. So, for example, there are 3 species of endemic seabirds which breed in the Benguela upwelling system, which all preferably forage for sardine and anchovy, and that is the Cape Gannets, the Cape Cormorant, and the African penguin. And over the past few decades, the population sizes of these species have been decreasing at an alarming rate, and this decrease has correlated extremely strongly with the biomass of sardine and anchovy. And due to this chronic decline of all 3 species populations, they are now classified as endangered, with the African penguin being identified as one of 3 penguin species in need of desperate conservation action. So in Namibia, the population of these 3 seabird species mirrored the crash of the sardine stock, as shown by this graph here. But in South Africa, the story is a little bit more complicated because South Africa's sardine and anchovy stocks have not collapsed, but instead they've gone a distributional shift from the west to the south coast due to changes in the climate and heavy pressures along the west coast. As a result, so this slide is a little bit scary, but if you have a look, as a result, since the 1950s, the population of these 3 seabirds have all been decreasing in colonies along the west coast, indicated in green, and been increasing in the populations along the south and southeast coast, indicated in blue and orange. This shift in the seabird numbers mirrored the shift in the distribution of anchovy and sardines and provides strong evidence that prey availability is a major factor driving these species population trends. However, the trajectory of the different species populations has exhibited different patterns and rates of decline, and these differences can largely be explained by the species' different foraging and life history states. So the flightless African penguin, often people's favorite, which has experienced the steepest rate of decline, is most limited in terms of its breeding foraging range, and shows high fidelity to breeding sites, meaning that once it has chosen somewhere to breed for the first time, they will remain faithful to that place for the remainder of their lifetime. And juvenile African penguins that haven't yet bred are highly likely to breed in the colonies where they were born, or not born, hatched. And that means that it's very unlikely that the adults will immigrate to colonies surrounded by better prey abundances. So even though the breeding foraging range of the Cape cormorant is less than that of the penguin, they have a low breeding site fidelity. So they're able to choose a breeding site every year that has higher prey abundances, leading to a higher chance that they will be able to successfully raise their chicks during a breeding attempt. So the Cape Gannets, whose population has decreased the slowest among the three species, has the largest breeding foraging range and does expand its range to follow shifts in its prey distribution. They're also able to switch their diet to prey that is more available, such as sauri and fishery discards, although these food items have low nutritional content compared to anchovy and sardine, and their availability has buffered the gannets population decline. And even though the adults have a high breeding site fidelity, unlike the African penguins, the juveniles do not. So that the juveniles can expand their range and start breeding in other colonies that have a higher prey abundance, such as along the south or east coasts. So there are tools to ensure enough prey for marine predators, and these are things like marine protected areas, an ecosystem-based approach to fisheries management, and offsetting mismatches in predator-prey distributions. The extremely good news that I'd like to share tonight is all three of these tools are currently in practice in South Africa. For example, spatial layers of predator distributions have been incorporated in marine spatial planning initiatives in South Africa, such as the Critical Biodiversity Areas Map. And then there are efforts to incorporate relationships between sardine and anchovy biomass and the predator population numbers, reproductive performance, and foraging efforts into operational management procedures. So these procedures govern fishery practices of sardine and anchovy in South Africa. So that, for example, if the fish biomass drops below a level that is shown to have a negative impact on the birds or marine predators, the fisheries management would account by this by possibly lowering the amount of fish that's allowed to be caught by the fisheries that year, or restrict fishing in important areas to predators. There's also been a massive effort by many organizations to prohibit fishing around African penguin breeding colonies to ensure sufficient prey for the penguin while they're breeding. Unfortunately, these deliberations of these closures are still ongoing, but there are currently interim closures around the colonies. And lastly, there's been an amazing effort by being led by my colleague Christina Hagen and our host for tonight's conservation conversations to create a new African penguin colony west of Cape Gannets, where there's very good sardine and anchovy abundance and low pressure on the fish stock by fisheries. All of these tools and the way they've been implemented in South Africa are highly reliant on knowing where the birds go at sea. For terrestrial birds, this is a much easier task, although still an onerous one, because the birds' habitats are more easily accessible to humans. For seabirds, regular boat surveys or tours are very expensive, and they do not cover the entire habitat of the seabird. Thus, much of the seabird's life and habitat is out of sight and out of mind of humans. And we need to be able to correctly quantify where these birds are going to be able to conserve them properly. So to do this, over the past decade and a half or a little bit more, many organizations have tracked Cape Gannets, Cape cormorants, and African penguins with miniature GPS depth, temperature, and accelerometer loggers, as well as animal-borne cameras and hydrophones to gain further insight to where and how these birds are using their environment. So these data are crucial for conservation, for the birds' conservation, as it allows for this at-sea habitat to be quantified, as well as to identify any possible threats they are facing at sea. So these loggers have quite a low impact on the birds. We attach them to the birds using waterproof tape, which is removed after one foraging trip without damaging any feathers. And here on the slide, you can see three different types of loggers. So here on the top left is a AXI trick from TechnoSpot that records GPS location, temperature, depth, and accelerometry, and it weighs less than 80 grams, if you can believe. On the bottom left is an example of one of the cameras that we put onto the Cape Cormorants. We also put a very similar one onto African penguins. It's just a little bit larger. These cameras also, not this one on the screen, but the ones on the African penguin, have a built-in GPS accelerometer and depth recorder. On the bottom right over here is one of our GPS GSM modules from PathTrack, which we use to track penguins outside of the breeding season. So outside of the breeding season, the birds don't come back to their colonies for extended amounts of time. And we need to be able to download the data remotely, especially if the logger fails or falls off the bird before we are able to see the bird again. These logs are able to connect to the cell phone signals or cell phone networks and regularly send us an update of where our penguins are. So data collected from these loggers have gained great insight into the marine habitat of these birds, and these insights have directly fed into the conservation and management practices of the species. So here, for example, by annually tracking African penguins from St. Croix Island, Professor Lorian Pishiku and colleagues were able to show that these birds completely changed when they're foraging during years when seismic surveys were being undertaken just outside of the bay. This was the first evidence ever shown for the impact of underwater noise on African penguins, or actually penguins in fact. And then this led us to attribute the recent dramatic 90% population drop in the number of African penguins breeding on St. Croix Island to the increase in marine traffic in Algoa Bay and the related increases in underwater noise. So St. Croix was previously the largest African penguin colony in the world, and it decreased from just about 8,000 breeding pairs in 2019 to just 1,200 pairs counted this year. But now you might all be asking, what does it matter if the African penguin populations are declining? Well, the African penguin is a marine upper level predator, and their population numbers can have direct and indirect effects on their function of their ecosystem. So using animal-borne cameras, Alistair McInnes and Pierre Pistorius recently showed some direct evidence for this. So as a diving seabird, penguins can dive up to 100 meters and thus access prey at great depths. However, other flying seabirds such as gannets and shearwaters can only dive up to about 10 to 20 meters. So Alistair and Pierre showed that penguins play an important role of driving the prey up to the surface where it's more accessible to flying seabirds. So this graph is a little bit complicated on the screen, but it shows an entire track of one of the penguins they had a camera on. And birds on the surface in flight are shown by the gray and black dots, and the size of those dots are the number of birds present. Along the track is where the penguins are catching fish, and the little triangles and stars are where the other birds are catching prey. So I've got an example here of one video. I'm sorry if it lags. I'm sure we can get a video that doesn't lag on the recording that will be put on YouTube and Facebook. So here you can see they've driven this ball right up to the surface where the birds are picking fish off. Sorry, it's very quick. The birds are very quick. And in a moment, you'll see a few shearwaters. There we go. And there are a few Cape Cormorants. So when you slow the videos, you can see them very nicely. All right. So by tracking Cape Gannets, David Grimley and his team assessed the daily energy expenditure of gannets breeding on Malchus Island on the west coast using using high resolution time energy budget derived from GPS tracking and accelerometer data. Shockingly, they found that these birds were expending more energy than they were gaining when foraging, and that 80 to 95% of their feeding dives were unsuccessful. Their results showed that these birds are foraging at an energy loss, which has long-term fitness costs in terms of adult body condition and reproductive performance. And this explains the local population decline. Based on this evidence, they called for regional-based management of fisheries with the cessation of purseine fisheries along the west coast. So during years of low prey availability, the Cape Gannet has also been observed to switch their prey to eating fisheries discards, snapping up any fish that are thrown overboard. Unfortunately, this is not a good thing for the Cape Gannet, as firstly, this leads to the risk of the gannets being accidentally caught in the fisheries nets, with 2% of all seabirds dying as bycatch in South Africa being Cape Gannet. And secondly, that these fisheries discards have a much lower energy content compared to their natural prey, sardine and anchovy, meaning that these birds are eating junk food and they're not gaining enough energy to feed themselves or their growing chicks. And then recently, another example of how tracking our endangered seabirds has helped their conservation is an initiative led by BirdLife South Africa has collated all the tracking data ever collected on these 3 species. This included data collected from many individuals, including from organizations like Forestries, Fisheries and the Environment, the University of Exeter, the University of Cape Town, Nelson Mandela University, and Chazé in France. And now we sat and analyzed all these data using methods developed by BirdLife International to identify the most important areas to these birds at sea. And we submitted these layers to the Critical Biodiversity Areas Map. So this Critical Biodiversity Map is a part of the National Coastal and Marine Biodiversity Plan. And this plan is used to inform planning and decision-making in support of sustainable ocean development within South Africa. And this includes the identification of new marine protected areas. Thus, the at-sea habitat of these birds is now being represented within marine spatial planning initiatives in South Africa, albeit only for those populations that have representative tracking data for their respective life history stages. Now, although we've gained a tremendous amount of knowledge by tracking these birds, there is still some missing information. And this gap in our knowledge is largely in the distribution of the birds outside of the breeding season. And this is a gap that urgently needs to be filled. And this is because of the vastly different distributions between the breeding and non-breeding seabirds. The distribution of, while breeding, the distribution of seabirds is constrained around their breeding islands or breeding colonies, because they regularly need to return and feed their chicks or incubate their eggs. Outside of the breeding season, these restraints are lifted, and there's much evidence for many species expanding their distribution and target much more distant profitable foraging areas. However, this expanded distribution increases the probability of the seabirds interacting with potentially risky human activities. In addition, the non-breeding season is often marked by higher adult mortality, and if the foraging conditions, so if there's not a lot of prey around, is poor, it can have carryover effects into the following breeding season. So, for example, this is a breeding track of an African penguin from Stony Point, and this is not a breeding, sorry, it's multiple individuals colored by the different colors, and this is an example of tracks of pre-molt penguins. So just after they've bred and just before they molt, the birds go on this extensive trip to find more food. Oops, sorry. So our deficit in knowledge of the non-breeding distribution of the Benguela seabirds is largely due to the cost of the tracking devices we need to track them during this time. Because during the breeding season, the birds don't return to the nest, because during the breeding season, they do return to the nest, we can use relatively cheaper tracking devices which only allow the users to retrieve the data by manually downloading it from the logger. Non-breeding seabirds are unlikely to return to their breeding colonies for an extended amount of time, which means their tracking devices are very likely to fall off as their feathers molt, and thus more expensive loggers that are able to send data remotely are needed. So the coastal seabird team at BirdLife South Africa has long since recognized the missing link in our knowledge, and thanks to funds donated by the Charles van der Merwe Trust, they started tracking pre- and post-molt penguins. So unlike any other seabird, which staggers their molt over the year, penguins replace their entire plumage in 2 to 5 weeks in a so-called catastrophic molt. And while molting, the penguins are land-bound and entirely dependent on fat reserves, resulting in a 40 to 50 loss in their body weight over the molt period. So penguins starve if they don't commence their molt with sufficient fat reserves to complete the molt and return to sea. Consequently, the penguin molt is often marked by higher adult mortality. And even if the penguins survive the molt, poor prey conditions during the post-molt recovery period can have carryover effects into the following breeding season. And these factors can have serious negative consequences on individuals and associated population growth, highlighting the importance of the non-breeding period for penguin conservation strategies. So now to show you some of our results. So far, we have tracked pre- and post-molt penguins from Bird Island, Stony Point and Dasson Island annually since 2012. And these data have been crucial in deliberations surrounding the spatial management of the species, especially because the pre- and post-molt life history stages are so crucial for the African penguin survival. So from these data we collected, we firstly showed that the penguins far exceed their 50-kilometer foraging range observed during the breeding season and can travel up to 600 kilometers from their breeding colonies. So we showed that although these pre- and post-molt birds travel much further compared to their breeding counterparts, they still intensively use waters within 20 kilometers around their colonies, with pre-molt birds spending 30% of their total trip within 20 kilometers of their island, their breeding island. During their post-molt trips, 60% of their time was spent around Dasson Island within 20 kilometers. Stony Point, 38%. At Bird Island, 76% of the bird's time during the pre-molt trip was spent around the island, and 55% during the post-molt period. So we're now extending this work to track non-breeding gannets and cormorants. From in-person observations, we know that outside of the breeding season, both of these species expand their distributions to most of west and east of Africa. However, we don't know whether these birds congregate in certain areas, if some areas are more important than others. However, we have currently raised enough funds for loggers to track non-breeding Cape Gannets. And in the beginning of next year, we will deploy the first loggers on non-breeding Cape Gannets, and we're exceptionally excited to see where they're going. Not only will we be able to quantify their distribution, investigate important areas for them at sea, we'll also be able to gauge their potential risk to bycatch. So we're still in the process of raising resources to track the Cape Cormorants outside of the breeding season. And any of you are interested in helping me along that journey, please do not hesitate to contact me. So thank you all for listening. That's the end of my story for tonight, and I'll very happily answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Tegan. That was a great overview of the importance of tracking and what we're doing at BirdLife South Africa and with many partners to track these birds to help conserve them. So while people are gathering their thoughts and putting questions in the Q&A box, I'd just like to invite everyone to join us again next week for next week's webinar, which is another BirdLife South Africa colleague who will be presenting, Linda van den Heever, who will be talking about her work looking at lead poisoning in Cape and whiteback vultures. So please do tune in for that. So yeah, please do pop your questions in the Q&A box. And Tegan, at the beginning or in the pre-webinar chat question, which we only put together just before this webinar, so apologies for my typo in the question. How many kilometers can penguins swim in a day? Because I don't. Yes, go ahead.
So during the breeding seasons, penguins can vertically swim about, I think it's about between 50 and 60 kilometers, not vertically, horizontally, sorry. And then if you include all of the up and down, I think it's up to 100, 120 kilometers in one day.
Sure, that's far for a small bird that can only swim. Because I know
Incredible.
gannets can go very, very long distances, but they can fly. But penguins are very powerful swimmers, because of course that's where they are kind of most at home, is in the water, not on land. So there is a question in the chat box from Lisa Newpin asking if there's any similar work on bank cormorants. I'm not aware of any. Tegan, do you know?
I'm not currently aware of any, but I know the bank cormorant is very sensitive, so you can't handle them as easily as these three species. BirdLife South Africa has also focused their effort on these three species because they eat the same prey. So they eat anchovy and sardine, where the bank cormorant mostly eats rock lobster. We have included, or I know the spatial layers of their distributions were included in the critical biodiversity areas map, but this was just from at-sea observations. So they knew that these birds only go 20 kilometers from their colonies, so they did buffers around their colonies rather than, they've never investigated their actual congregation areas at sea or important areas at sea. Yeah, but it is important to track them because they are endangered as well and their populations are declining. Yeah,
absolutely. It's just trying to figure out a way to do it without unduly disturbing them or causing harm. And there's a lot more happening in that sphere in terms of remote monitoring and all those more hands-off monitoring methods. So Lisa has also asked a follow-up question, well, not a follow-up question, but another question asking what is happening in Namibia. Yeah, BirdLife South Africa obviously is working a lot in South Africa, but I know there is some work being done in Namibia, but perhaps not as intensively.
No, they definitely have tracked the African penguin in Namibia. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what they're currently doing, but I do know the Benguela Current Commission has a massive effort at the moment to get all of their seabird spatial distribution, or marine predators, in fact, get their spatial distributions and incorporate it into management of the entire Benguela ecosystem. Yeah,
it would be great to see that Benguela Current Commission project coming together to kind of unite the three countries, Angola, Namibia, and South Africa, so that there's kind of a not that we've been not that there's anything wrong with how it's working now, but just so there's a bit more flow of information and sharing of best practice between the three countries. And then Beverly Mole is asking, I guess, for seeing the Sandparks logo on the slide, is asking how Sandparks fits into this, and whether the Pelican, whether you have any knowledge of the Pelican Watch on Jutton and Mulchus Islands. So perhaps you can just first talk to our relationship with Sandparks.
Yeah, so we do work closely with Sandparks. So Sandparks works with DFFE, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, to in the conservation management of everything. And obviously, we work with their scientists coming up with the best way to monitor the birds and the best regimes of our monitoring so that it will fit into their management and what they need. I'm not sure if I've missed something, Christina.
No, that covers it well. We obviously rely on SANParks and indeed Cape Nature, who are the kind of custodians of the birds at the colonies, to allow us to work in the colonies and on these birds to try and help them. So, and we always share our information with them as we get it, so they can also use it and have a chance to contribute to the project design and that sort of thing. Then I don't know if you know too much about Pelican Watch, Tegan. Otherwise, I can speak to it briefly.
No, I really don't. I love watching the pelicans on Dassen, but that's it.
So for those who don't know, pelicans on the west coast of South Africa have, for a number of years, well, I'm actually not sure how long it's been going on for, but they have been feeding on seabird chicks, a lot of cormorant chicks and also Cape Gannet chicks on the islands in Saldanha Bay, so Malchus Island and Jutton Island. And it's been quite a serious problem. And it's a bit of a tricky one because the pelicans are also protected, they're threatened seabirds, so any control needs to be non-lethal. So SANParks and the honorary rangers have set up a program called Pelican Watch, which has been ongoing for quite a while now, where they station volunteers on Jutton and Malchus Island to watch for pelicans landing on the islands and then going to gently shoo them away. So BirdLife South Africa hasn't had a huge amount of involvement in that project, but it's a very worthwhile project, and people can Google it to see how you can get involved if that's something that you might want to do, be a pelican chaser on an island. So that's, hopefully there'll be an opportunity to kind of learn more about it and be involved from BirdLife side in the future. On to another question from Mike, who is asking about the declines of the anchovy and sardines off the Namibian coast and what was the cause of that. He suggested overfishing by Chinese fishing boats or climate change. Tegan, can you give some insight into the Namibian situation?
Christina, this is a bit of a difficult one to answer because I'm not sure anyone is 100%. What I have read is that it was due to overfishing. I don't think it was Chinese or anything to do with any nationality. It was the local fishermen. So it's probably poor management of the fisheries. But I'm not sure it was monitored too closely. So it could have been climate. I'm unsure, but it did completely destroy the ecosystem. And there was jellification of the ecosystem, which means it's been taken over by jellyfish completely, and it'll take a long time to balance itself again and get the anchovy and sardine to naturally repopulate the area.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning the crash happened in, I think, the 1970s. So it was before a lot of the, I guess, knowledge. Before there was a lot of knowledge on how to properly manage these small pelagic fish that are so abundant and seem sort of infinite stocks when they're abundant, but they can actually crash. So it probably was, they do go through boom and bust cycles. So it may be that there were a few years of poor recruitment, and then the fishing pressure in the 70s just caused that to collapse. And as Tegan said, it hasn't recovered in Namibia. Luckily, in South Africa, we still have some anchovy and sardine, and hopefully it'll stay that way for the foreseeable future, and hopefully increase from the current low levels. So linked to that, Eleanor Mary has asked whether it's correct to say the penguin decline is mostly caused by a decline in sardine and anchovy stocks, or are there other problems at the breeding sites, such as predation? Perhaps you can chat about some of the other threats.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there are definitely other threats at the breeding sites. They are taken out by seals in the water and caracal for the on-land sites, such as Stony Point and Boulders Beach. There are multiple threats these birds are facing. I mean, there's disease, there's not enough breeding habitats available due to extreme weather events taking away their breeding habitat, but also from when they used to harvest the guano. So these birds do burrow into the guano and make their nests underground, well, just a little bit underground. And when they took off all the guano, they no longer could do this. So there were surface nesters, and a lot of the eggs and chicks were taken by seagulls. But there are massive efforts in place at the moment by all the organizations listed on the screen at the moment and more to correct for this. There are nest boxes that have been put at all the colonies. There are seal watch, very similar to the Pelican Watch, and that problem is dealt with very well. The disease is monitored very well. So I can't definitely say whether the penguin decline is caused by sardine and anchovy stocks. I know that currently that threat is not managed as well as the other threats. That's about all I can say there. And it is one that we are trying to get into our management procedures and conservation of the bird.
It is very suggestive that food is the main problem, because of the close relationship between the penguin numbers and the fish numbers. So it's highly likely, but then there are all these other threats on top of it, which just are making the problem worse. So two people, Chad and Lungisani, have asked very similar questions, and I always find this question quite difficult to answer, Tegan, so hoping you have a better one, otherwise I can jump in and kind of give my answer. They're both kind of asking what the sort of average citizen can do to help these seabirds, you know, how people can get involved or contribute, and what people, oh, sorry, it was Christian and Chad, sorry, what people can do to make a difference for these threatened seabirds. So I don't know if you have a good answer for that. I sometimes struggle with this question.
But it is a very difficult question, because it does take an army to try to tackle some of these problems. But I can give you my response just based on the tracking work and the foraging areas that I'm most familiar with. So what you can do, so the biggest problem is we don't know where these birds are going at sea, and we need to know whether these areas change each year. So we are, with Christina and my other colleague, Alistair McInnes, are currently revamping the Atlas of Seabirds at Sea. So you can get on this as a citizen science app, and you can go out into sea and record where these birds are at, very similarly to SABAP 2, or the bird atlasing app with BirdLife. So that's one way, is you can give us direct observations of where the birds are. You can help with spreading the word. So it's shocking how many people, friends, family, people I meet every day, they don't know that these birds are in crisis and they're having a real problem, and a lot of effort needs to go to saving these birds from, well, hopefully not extinction, but from their populations declining. So if you can share media posts, get the words out there, tell everyone, listen, we've got a problem in our ocean and we need to put our efforts there. That would be great. And then there would be, if you could help me raise funds for any of the loggers so we can track the birds outside of the breeding season, that's also great. But that's a more difficult one. Yeah, that's what I can think of for now, Christina. What is your perfect answer?
Mine's not perfect by any means. You gave a great answer. The other thing is just to support organizations like BirdLife South Africa and SANCOB and the other NGOs that are working on these species, trying to conserve them. So either if you can support financially, do that. Otherwise, support, through sharing, as Tegan mentioned, social media posts. And, occasionally there will be a petition or something that we need signed. And so if you can support that way, that'll help us put pressure on the government. Or if there's, recently there was the biodiversity management plan for penguins that was out for public comment. So those sorts of things. And otherwise just be a good sort of environmental citizen, I guess, is try and reduce your consumption, and if you can recycle plastic or reduce the amount of plastic you use, because that's an ongoing problem in the sea. And then of course only eat sustainable seafood. WWF, the Sustainable Seafood Initiative, has a great resource to know what seafood is sustainable. So those sorts of things, just to be mindful of your impact on the environment, because it's all connected. Might not be directly helping penguins or gannets, but the actions of the whole population will help make things better in the marine environment. Well, questions are flooding in now, so I will go to Lindisani's question, asking about the banning of fishing around the foraging areas of penguins. He heard that it was slow progress, and is it a problem from implementation or monitoring? Yeah, do you want to just very briefly chat about where we are in the process?
So we're quite far down the road, I think. It all started in 2008, where they did experimental closures around the islands, 3 years on, 3 years off, around 4 of the main penguin colonies. And they used this to see if there's any effect on the penguin population, on the chick condition, where they're growing better or worse when the area around the penguin colonies were closed. And it's taken many years of very, very smart mathematicians and statisticians looking at this data to figure out whether there's a positive or negative effect on the African penguin population in general. And it does seem there is a positive effect. And now this has gone through a few reviews, and we've now closed the islands. We've got interim closures while we carry on the deliberations between the exact boundaries that these closures will take, and whether these closures will be permanent or just for a few years. So we're quite hopeful at the moment. I don't know, Christina, if you can answer better.
Yeah, so there's been a bit of a debate about what the impact will be on the fishing industry. Obviously, we don't want to cause a massive economic hardship to the industry and the actual fishermen who are making their livelihoods from fishing. So there's those sorts of issues that need to be balanced, and the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment has got involved, and will be setting up an international review panel to look at all the evidence and to advise on what should be done. So hopefully we'll see some progress very early next year. So we'll just take 3 more questions, I think, and then we'll finish comfortably before 8 and your load shedding kicking in. So Eleanor Mary asks whether there's any evidence to suggest that penguins are ingesting plastic pellets in the ocean. Do you know the answer to that, Tegan?
I don't. I know there have been studies, but unfortunately I didn't follow. I'm not sure if you know.
No, I think it's fairly unlikely because penguins only eat live prey. So they're unlikely to be scavenging and kind of eating plastic by accident. I know there have been problems of penguins being entangled. You know, they use plastic bits and cormorants actually as well, using bits of plastic or fishing line in their nets and then getting tangled. But as far as ingestion goes, I'm not too sure.
No.
Yeah, sorry not to be able to answer you better, Eleanor Mary, but I don't think it is a huge problem. And then I'm going to take this question from Rosemary as it pertains to my project. Rosemary's asked whether the area at De Hoop has had any penguins landing there in the area that we've prepared for them. And yes, we have. In June, some penguins turned up. Initially, we only found 2 or 3 adult penguins, and now there have been as many as 12 in one day. So that's very exciting news. They haven't started breeding yet, as far as we can tell, but we're trying not to monitor them too intensively and go looking under rocks to try and find nets. So we'll have to wait and see if there are any little fluffy chicks popping up at any point. But yeah, it's very exciting news for this long-term project that I've been working on. And I did give a Conservation Conversations webinar a couple of months ago. So if you go onto our YouTube channel, you can find it there. And then the final question. Yeah, sorry, Tegan.
But in quickly, I've had a message from David Roberts, the sandcop vet, and he says he does not find plastic inside of penguins.
Okay.
To answer the question properly.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
That's very good to know. The final question from Mike. He's asked whether you can please let everyone know what the cost of a logger is for tracking the penguins and other sea gannets and cormorants in the post-breeding period. And that might help people decide whether they could support the project financially.
So these loggers are a little bit scary expensive. They range between 20 to 25,000 Rand. But you shouldn't get scared by this amount. I mean, any donations are very welcome to help with field work or anything like that. So it ranges, you get the GSM GPS that I showed you on the screen, and those are about, I think they're 17 to 20,000. And then for the birds that we're unsure where they go of, so like the Cape Gannet now, we're going to be using Argos. Can you remember how much they were, Christina?
And they're about 20,000 Rand.
Also about 20,000 Rand. And then, but those ones, they use the Argos satellite. So you have to pay $60, 60 euros per month to use the Argos satellite for each logger. So that's where that cost comes from as well. Yeah.
So if anyone is interested in supporting, they can get in touch with Tegan. I see Chad has asked if you can put your email address in the chat box, Tegan, if you don't mind. And then if anyone is interested in supporting or has any ideas for funding, then please do get in touch with Tegan and let her know. So I think we will leave it there before Tegan's power goes off. Just to say thank you very, very much, Tegan, for sharing your research with us and the interesting work and important conservation that is going on for these threatened seabirds. And there are lots of lovely messages in the chat that you can read later on. So that's all from me. Tegan, I don't know if you have anything any last words you want to say?
Not many, just thank you all very much for listening, and thank you for being a brilliant host, Christina. That's it.
Okay. You're welcome. Yeah, so thank you very much to all our viewers for joining us, and please do join us again next week for another conservation conversation. Good night.